Again, good morning. Great to see you today. Thank you for being here, and looking forward to starting this new teaching today as we again take our passage from John chapter 12, as we read earlier, looking at the words of Christ as he's talking about the coming event. So over the next few weeks, we'll be gathering together, Lord willing, and talking about this most important event and taking a very serious and personal look at the cross. You know, we of course hear about all that. We might even think, well, good grief, what else could be said about that? A lot. A whole lot, because we're going to look at it slightly differently. We're going to be looking at it again through the personal lens, much like what we've been doing this year is really getting a little closer, looking at it through our own eyes, understanding the importance of what it means to me. And that again, not being an arrogant statement, but what does it mean? Because oftentimes in life, when we deal with a situation, doesn't it affect you differently when it affects you? It always does, right? We can see something from afar. You know, someone going through a tragedy even, and it's terrible and we may feel bad, but it's different when it's you. It always is. And these stories that we go through and these understandings and events that we go through, it's so much different when we realize, wait a minute, that was done for me. That was because of me. That could have been me. We see all these different scenarios here. So while we know about the event, we obviously celebrate that, we understand what happened, and we know about the events that led to it, do we consider the message that it sends to us personally? So I want us to take a walk together as we walk with the disciples. We walk with the prophets of old and walk with Jesus himself, and understand why this still matters. So today we find Jesus speaking. And again, I'm calling this message the shadow. Why? Because we've heard the statement, standing in the shadow, or so-and-so cast a mighty big shadow, simply meaning it looms over something else. It's just kind of there. You can't really get away. In other words, it can't be escaped. The shadow of the cross was always over Jesus. Always. From the time of the manger, I found this amazing picture. I didn't have it in time to get it on there, but I created this picture of that, and I'll try to maybe show it next week. But from the manger until it took place, that was there. That overcast, that this was on the way type thing, that looming type thing. So we find Jesus here speaking, and he begins, again, we look at verse 23. He begins with, the hour has come. Simply saying, it's time. It's time. All the work, all the teaching, all the directions, they have all led to this moment. And so we find in that this shadow, again, has been there for a long time, but it's slowly starting to retract, and the fullness of the light is beginning to shine through. The hour has come. The time is now. And so when we see this statement, the hour has come, it's a statement of fact, but it is also a statement of preparation. Because what he was saying to those who were with him was, hang on. This ride we're getting ready to go on, it's going to be a little bumpy, not going to be fun, it's going to be a little difficult. Jesus knew that it was going to be ugly. Jesus knew that it was going to be painful. He knew that it was going to be awful. But he believed it would be worth it. You know, that's the beauty of the message, is because when we understand that he did not just look at the moment. He looked beyond the moment. Sometimes we have a hard time doing that because, but that's going to be bad, or that's going to be, terrible, or we can think of all the different descriptors that we want to use, and oftentimes we can't get past that moment, right? We get stuck there. Well, that's going to hurt, or that's going to this or that. We don't see the results on the other side of that. And we could use a million different analogies, but here we see is Jesus is looking at something that is brutal. At that time, At that time, it was said to be the most cruel and painful and awful manner of capital punishment. It was the worst. But here's the beautiful part about this. God looked at man and he took our worst and he stepped into it and defeated it. So when we think about the beauty of this, the hour, Jesus says, has come. No more waiting. And it's there. It's in that statement that we find all the answers are provided. The hour has come for the Son of Man. So specifically stating who this moment involved, to be glorified. That speaks of the cross. Okay? Because when we think of what that word means, the word glorified means to be made glorious. To be exalted, which means to be lifted up. To be given divine power. Now, interesting, before this, prior to this time, none of those things would apply to the life of Jesus. None of them. Why? Because he didn't live in that manner. Why? Because it wasn't his time yet. He would say so, right? We see the way that he was living. Many recognized there was something different. Clearly, there was something different. It was clear that he was not just someone or just anybody. But he never drew attention to himself. He always would say, don't tell anybody. It's not my time. He would say different things like that because he wanted to place the focus not on him, but rather on the words that were spoken, on the miracles that were performed. He wanted people to see what this was all about. Again, he told his mom, he told Mary at the changing of the water to wine, my time is not yet come. But it is here now that we see, he says, the hour has arrived. The hour is upon us. The hour has come for him to be glorified. Again, which means to be lifted up. And in this case, very literal. Okay, lifted up. And everybody from that moment forward, everybody would know exactly who he is. The hour has come for this to be revealed. The hour has come for this to be known. It will no longer be a speculation. It will no longer be a secret. So he goes on. And he says in verse 24, truly I tell you, so this is a serious statement, a matter of fact, a teaching moment, if you will. And he says, unless, so it must happen. It has to happen. A grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains by itself. Now, what's he saying here? All right. So he's saying if the seed which exists in order to create, now think about that for a minute. Why does that seed exist? To create something else, right? He's saying if that seed which is made to create, if indeed it does not go forth in the manner for that creation, then it doesn't fulfill its purpose. If this seed is not planted, if this seed is not put in the ground and dies, it does not produce, right? It cannot move forward. In other words, it remains in the sack. It remains in the pouch. It remains in the cup or wherever it's at on the shelf. He says the hour has come. The seed must be planted. The time is now. The soil is tilled. It's ready. It's waiting. Or it will not work. We cannot have it both ways. So he says the hour has come. Of course, he's speaking about himself here, right? He's speaking about himself. So he gives clarity that if the wheat does not die, it cannot produce. We think about that from an analogy point, and it's like, wow, this is pretty deep, because it has to sacrifice something to produce something else, right? There has to be something of giving up one thing to attain something much, much greater. And we don't often think that way, do we? You know, because again, we get trapped in the now, whether it's the good or the bad. Any of that, we kind of get locked into that. So he goes on, he says, but if it dies, if it dies, it produces much fruit. Okay, so what he's telling here is he's speaking of himself. So he gives clarity that it has to do this or it can't do that, right? That's what we're seeing here. So he says, if it dies, it produces much fruit. Jesus knew what was coming. He says, if it dies, it produces much fruit. Jesus knew the death that was coming, but he knew that it would produce something. He knew that it would produce much fruit, and without it, nothing would change. The wheat would remain by itself. It would be, again, in the sack. in a cup, on the shelf, in the bag, in the farm, and it would have done nothing. It would have produced nothing. So what he's saying here is nothing happens if something doesn't happen. If the farmer never plants the seed, it never grows. That's a pretty simple analogy, right? Okay, maybe all of us have experimented with gardening at some point in time. Even if it's a little plant in your window at home or something. Everybody's tried to grow something, right? All right, and some of you have a green thumb, some of you don't. All right, and nobody has to raise their hand on that. But regardless, you've tried. But if you never tried, it never grew a thing. It was guaranteed not to work if you never did it. Guaranteed not to work. That's what Jesus is saying. If this doesn't happen, nothing is going to change. If Jesus doesn't die on the cross, if he doesn't step into its shadow and embrace the task that it brings him, it does not produce the desired harvest, which is us. He said it's got to happen. It has to happen, and it has to happen this way. But when we begin to understand the breakdown of this, it's not just the literalcy of the death, it's why. What is this going to produce? Because it is not only just a figure, the literal cessation of life, if you will, the not breathing anymore, but it is, I'm stepping out of me. It's not about me, it's about something bigger than me. And that is where we really find the beauty in the power of this message. Because if we consider the challenge of Jesus about dying to self, okay? He said, if you're going to follow me, you must deny yourself, die to self. In other words, it's not about me. It's not about me. Jesus is saying, I want you to think about this for a minute. Had Jesus not had that mentality about this, had he not had this thought process, what if he just said, I'm not doing that? Man, there's no way. I'm not going through that. I mean, they're not worth it. They won't care. I mean, they're going to do whatever they want to do anyhow. What difference does it make? There's no way. That's just too much. What would that look like? The seed would never get planted. The wheat would be by itself. It would have no purpose. It would produce nothing. It would not do what it was created to do. But if we look beyond self, saying, your will be done. Your will be done. It allowed not just the seed to be planted, it allowed the seed to grow, which ultimately would allow and the ability to produce a harvest. The shadow of the cross loomed over the entire life of Jesus. And here he says, now the time has come. Now the time has come. The light will remove the shadow. I love that. I love that. There was a guy gave an illustration years ago. He said it was a dream, a vision, whatever. The guy, I don't know, but it was actually very interesting. He said that he had this image or vision or something that he had gone to heaven. And then he's walking along and he's talking to different ones and this escort angel, whatever was carrying through. And he said, I've noticed something interesting. Everywhere that we walk, he said, there's no shadow here. He said, that's because there's only light. I love that. It's just kind of a beautiful statement. But what we see here is the beauty of this. And if this message of removing this. It's no longer in the dark. Jesus says in verse 25, he said, if the one who loves his life will lose it. But wait a minute. Aren't we supposed to enjoy life? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a gift from God. But while it's a gift, and a gift is a blessing, right? A gift is an absolute blessing. It's an even greater blessing when we can share the gift, right? If it's just mine, then it's just that. That doesn't really affect anybody, right? It doesn't really produce anything of any benefit to anybody else. If you gift me with an instrument, but I can play you a song, then that's a real blessing. If you gift me with some ingredients, but I cook you a meal, that's a greater blessing. We see the analogy of how all these things come to be. And so when we look at this, he says, well, if you love this life, you will lose it. Here's the thing, friends, and we know this in the world today. Selfishness produces what? Nothing. Nothing. It helps absolutely no one. In fact, it creates an ugliness. It creates an ugliness. And what it does is it never resembles anything of Christ. Never. It's impossible. Now, does that mean that we have to give everything we got away? No, of course not. That's not what he's talking about at all. What he's saying here is this is going far, far, far beyond material stuff. This causes us to look at the depth of love that the Father has for us. This causes us to look deeper and say, what does all this mean? This allows us to see the example of Christ. In other words, he set the bar. He set the bar. He's saying, this is not about me. This is all about everybody else. And that's what he's saying. When he lifts up all will see. And so he did it first. He didn't do anything that he didn't ask anything that he didn't do first. And that's the measure of everything. So he said, the whole world, that means me and you. That means everybody. Selfishness never produces that level of heart. So what he's saying, what I'm doing will benefit everybody. What I'm doing is bigger than me. What I'm doing is bigger than anything we could ever imagine. So I can't be caught in the moment to where, well, I can't do that because it's going to bother me. He's showing us that that's not how he operates. He says those who love will lose. In other words, if you love what's placed, if your love for whatever you have is placed above what is actually valuable, it won't remain. It will run out. It will not save you. But look, I had all this, I had all that. But you didn't have anything because you didn't have Christ. That's all he's saying. He said, if you have you have everything in the world. One of the silliest things, and I think I've said this before, I remember back in the 80s as a kid, going back and forth to the beach, you go all the T-shirt shops, all the junk shops, and there was always this T-shirt that had, he who dies with the most wins. Really? How'd you win? If you're dead, that don't really make a whole lot of sense, right? Jesus here is saying, if you love this life, you will lose it. All he's saying is, if that's above everything, if that's all you got, it will run out. Because time don't wait for anybody, right? It does eventually run out. We know that to be very, very true. And so if your love is placed above what is actually valuable, it will not remain. It will run out. It will not save you. But he says the one who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Now that seems strange. Okay, if we think about hating something and being able to keep it, it sounds the opposite of how we operate. But if we understand, back to the grain of wheat. If we understand, it dies and produces more. In other words, it gives up the life it has rather than stay on the shelf, and it becomes a blessing that's not just a blessing once, but it produces over and over and over. Because once that grain is harvested, then it comes into multiple products and multiple meals and multiple this. It never stops, right? It continues on and on and on. And it may have been harvested years ago, but it continues to do that. That's what he's saying here. If you hate what you have, and again, we're not talking about the emotional disdain of hate, but if you're willing to let that go, what could be coming is much, much greater and will last forever. This is what Jesus did for us on the cross. His death one time produces life until this very day. Isn't that great? When we think about the beauty of what he did, the sacrifice of what he offered us, one time. The grain had to die in order to produce. That's what the analogy is here. So to hate life on earth, again, it's not a statement about misery or anger, but rather, I begin to see clearly now, there is more. There is life beyond this one. Therefore, I enjoy this one. I enjoyed this one, but I will not allow it to prevent me from the next one. That's the beauty of understanding what he's trying to get us to see. What's the old Johnny Nash song? I can see clearly now. The rains is gone. You remember, everybody's heard that old song somewhere along the way. But what we get, the beauty of what Jesus is trying to get us to understand in these statements is look beyond now. Everything's not about now. While we enjoy now and we prepare now, but preparing is for something that is coming, right? And so we see the beauty of this. And there's a songwriter wrote these words: if you want more happy, then your heart will hold. If you want to stand taller, if the truth were told, take whatever you have and give it away. If you want less lonely and a lot more fun and deep satisfaction when the day is done, then throw your heart wide open and give it away. That's some powerful words when you begin to think about it compared to what he said. So when we grasp what Jesus is speaking here, and then we realize, wait a minute, he's talking about himself. And he's talking about his willingness to do this for me. But I'm this and I'm that and I've made, he knows. He knows. I saw this beautiful quote this morning. It said, failure is an event, not a person. You are not a failure. That's a powerful thing. And this is what he's talking about, is I know. But Lord, I know. I know. But I did it for you. When we begin to grasp the personal nature of this beauty and the words that he's giving here, this willingness to do this for us, I say this. When we hear this, when we grasp this, when we hold on to this, then indeed we should be ready to stand and glorify his name. Amen? When we realize God did that for me, when we grasp the power of that, it's an amazing, amazing thing. So he goes on in verse 26. If anyone serves me, he must follow me. Where I am, there my servant also will be. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him. So we look at that. If that key word is important because that presents the choice. That presents the opportunity. That presents the option that everyone has. He said, if anyone serves me. Now, this is about the call that is given. This is about the door that is opened. It's a witness. It's all about sharing him with others. He says, he must. Now, that word must, again, it removes the option because this has to be. Must is a very key word. We went through a several-part series on must as the first of the year. And he says, follow me. Now, we've seen that repetitively throughout Scripture. What is Jesus saying when he's saying, follow me? Watch what I do. Watch what I do. But even greater, the more you follow me, the more you'll know who I am. Okay, and that's where the difference is. It's, again, we talked about this morning in our class. It's one thing to follow the rules or whatever, but why? Who are we following? Why do we do this? Who is this? This is what we're finding, the personal nature of Christ and the relationship we can have with him, is we have one that loves us so much he was willing to die for us. Think about that. Have you ever known anybody in your life that would truly do that? Probably very, very few, if anybody. A lot of people say it, but actually do it is a whole different story, right? And do it in a very public and pretty humiliating and awful way of what he did for us. We understand what he's saying. He said, you must follow me. Come to know who I am. This 100% goes back to relationship. How well do we know him? Or do we know about him? That's two very different things, right? Because when we begin to understand the person and character of Christ, the things that he taught, the things that he did, how he treated people, versus just a religious figure, that's two very, very different things. Because we begin to understand, wait a minute, this really is impactful to me. And I've said this before, but if we don't know him, we can't follow him. Why? Because we haven't established trust. Trust is everything, right? Trust is everything because how great establishments, they have to have that for have great relationship. So he said we must follow him. That's very specific. It leaves no room for doubt. Must follow. That means watch, observe, go behind, act like, know who I really am. Don't make stuff up. Now that's important. I'm going to touch on that for just a minute. He says, follow me. That's singular. That's specific. That's clear. There is so few things today that cause chaos and destruction than adding to what he said. We see so much stuff today that is causing so much havoc and so many problems, especially within the believer's world, within the church, within everything, because, well, God said this and God said, but God didn't say it. And we're missing things. Jesus said, follow me. He was specifically saying, pay attention. Don't, because Revelation says, don't add to nor take away from, right? He's very, very clear about that. And so we see some specific things. He said, if you're going to serve me, you must follow me. Serve equals follow, which equals what? Results. That's what it means. So he says in this same verse, where I am, there my servant will also be. Will be. That's a statement of assurity. That's a statement of guarantee. He says this over in chapter 14, just a couple of chapters over. He says in verse 1 of chapter 14, do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If not, I would have told you. I am going away to prepare a place for you. And here we go. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also. So we see the promise of God of something to come. Something later, something that we are preparing for. So we see the power of the moment. The truth is laid out, the clear pointing toward better days. But one life must end for a new one to start. And that's difficult to wrap our minds around sometimes, because we only see it in death and life, and we don't see it in finality. We don't see the bigger picture of this, but that's what he's trying to point us toward, is that this one life must end to start a new one, which absolutely speaks of what salvation looks like, right? That's what he's talking about, is leaving one life to start the other. The two don't coexist, right? The wheat can't stay in the bag if it's going to grow the crop. That's the beauty of what we're trying to see. That's the picture that we're trying to paint in these words as he stands in the shadow of the cross. He's trying to get them to understand, if anyone serves me, that's no exceptions, the Father will honor him. It will not go unrecognized. It will not go. God is watching. He knows. He understands. It's just be mindful that serve is an action word. Okay? Serve is an action word. It's not sign up and go hide. It's not join and never come back. Okay? That happens all the time. That's just reality. God knows who means it. God knows who means it. That's just the bottom line. He knows who means it, and he knows what we're willing to do with it. He knows what we're going to do with it. And if we truly understand, follow me, if we truly grasp that, I believe this with all my heart. If we're truly following him, we'll make the changes that are needed, because it will come. You just become a different person. You know, Paul talks about becoming that new creature, that new creation. I think that's there's so much greater depth in that than what we understand, because you just don't become the same person anymore. You do leave that old life. You know, that grain gets planted and something new comes up, and it produces something that's so much better. So Jesus says the hour has come. In other words, the assignment is clear. It's coming. It's on the way. The seed's been planted. And Jesus says to those that are with him in verse 27, he says, now my soul is troubled. What should I say? Father, save me from this hour? But that is why I came. That is why I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. He says, my soul is troubled. Doubts, worries, second guesses. Is that what he's talking about? No. No, that's not what he's talking about at all. What he's talking about is the reality of, it really did come to this. We really have to do this. You know, let this cup pass from me. Okay, is it the battle? Yes, we can look at some of the human battle there, the fleshly battle of, you know, the argument, that argument on the side. But the reality, what we find here is, wow, it really did come to this. We really have to go through. We really have to go through it. I mean, it's got to be done. It really will cost this much. So he says, what should I say? What should I do? The hour has come. It's here. It's in front of us. Do I tell the Lord? Do I tell the Father, just save me? In other words, keep the grain of wheat in the bag. We're not planting this one. That crop's not going to happen. I want out. I've changed my mind. Show me another way, a better way, an easier way. Father, save me from this hour. But the hour has come. The hour's here. So there's no change in this now. The give, the sacrifice, the die. He says, well, that's why I'm here. That's why I came. Why would I ask to be resolved of that? Why would I ask to be relieved of that? That is exactly why I'm here. This is a full revealing of his whole purpose. This is exactly why he was here, right? The Pharisees got mad at him. They got angry with him for talking to the sinners. But he said to them in response, well, that's why I'm here. That's what I came for. So he's saying in this hour, now that it has come, to say, well, how about, let's not do that. Well, that's why I'm here. Why would I, in other words, why would I ask that? That's the point. That was my assignment. That's what I came for. It's like getting mad at the firefighter if they come to your house while it's on fire. That's why they're there, right? That's exactly the point. So that's what Jesus is trying to say here. And he says in these words, it's not for me to try and escape. It's not for me to try to find a replacement. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here. So he says, Father, glorify your name. I love that. Glorify your name. Jesus said earlier it was time for him to be glorified. Okay, think about how all this is tying together. It was time for him to be glorified. Now he surrenders to that moment. The hour has come, Father. It's time I'm in. Not asking for a way out. I'm in. I mean, that's so powerful right there. He says, Father, glorify your name. In other words, it's time to be lifted up. The hour has come. It's time for this to happen. We read that a voice came from heaven, and it said, I have glorified it. Okay, when? At the baptism, right? At the baptism, that's when the voice spoke out and said, this is my son in whom I am well pleased, right? We saw that part. And then he says, and God says, and I will glorify it again. That will come at it is finished. We see how all these different things are being poured out right before us. The verse 29, it says, they all heard it. Now think about this for a minute. Let's read this together. The crowd standing there heard it. It said it was thunder. Others said an angel has spoken to him. So they all heard it, right? But immediately what found its way in? Doubt. Oh no, that's not what happened. But it was right there. You heard it with your own ears. In some cases, you've seen it with your own eyes. But don't believe your lying eyes. You didn't really see that. I mean, I remember sometimes even back years ago, being on the road, you deal with certain things, and then certain people would come and get involved and say, no, you didn't see that. But you did see it. Here we find, this voice came, but it had to be something else. Jesus said, the voice came, removing a doubt. Okay, this is what he's saying. He's saying here, no, the voice came. Jesus responds, verse 30, this voice came. Okay, so they were saying there's thunder, there's an angel. He said, no, this voice came, not a voice, not thunder, it was a voice. It was God, not an angel. He says, but it was not for me. It was not for me. In other words, I'm settled. I know my assignment. That's to be taken care of. That voice was for you. Man, I love that. I mean, he's like, you're the one that's doubting here. You're the one that's skeptical here. It was for you. In other words, it's time to clear out any confusion. It's time to remove the doubts about who I am or why I'm here. This is why you've heard this voice. This is why this voice came not for me, but for you. Now is the judgment of the world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. In other words, the line is drawn. Who will you serve? That's really what it comes down to. The line is drawn. Who will you follow? Right? Because he says, the ruler of this world, he's out. I'm taking care of what needs to be taken care of. Basically, what he's saying here is, will you love your life or will you lose it? Will you love your life and will lose it? Will you hate it and look to eternity? The choice is going to be clear, but the choice is going to be yours. And that's a very clear thing that he's trying to lay out. He's laying out this case. The choice is going to be clear. He says in verse 32, as for me, if I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself. As for me, so the hour has come. This is the result of accepting the task to glorify the name of the Father. He said, if I am lifted up from the earth, this is speaking of the resurrection. Not the being lifted up from the earth on the cross, but this is lifted up from the earth. You've got to figure in the earth here. This is death. This is the planted seed. The resurrection produces the harvest. We see how he's making it all clear. He's saying, lifted up from the earth, I will, that's an affirmative, draw, that's invite, all people to myself. In other words, again, the choice will be clear. The choice will be clear because of the results of the event that is about to happen. But he's saying it cannot happen if the seed remains in the bag. That's exactly the point of our life. If we cannot make the change if we never plant the seed. We cannot make the change if we don't make the sacrifice. We cannot make the change if we don't follow him. Okay? In other words, if I'm going to continue to plant my own crop and do it my own way, I'll stay in that place and I'll die in that place. Jesus makes that very, very clear. He said this to indicate what it says. He said this to indicate what kind of death he was about to happen. This was going to happen. It said the death that he was about to die. This is going to happen. There's not a question about that part. So the importance of the cross, when we think about, when we break this down and we look at it, not just the word for word side of it, but understand the picture that has been painted, the analogy, it all points us to salvation. The whole message is about that. If this doesn't happen, this can't happen. That's really what it comes down to. If you remain where you are, that's where you'll be. But if you've planned for something else and you're willing to leave this, there's something way better over here. But are you willing to do it? That's really what it comes down to. And Jesus gives this not just verbally, but he does it literally. He steps out of life into death to produce life. What an important thing, what a powerful thing when we begin to understand the importance of the cross. The message to all is this is how much God loves you. That's really what it comes down to, friends. This is how valuable you are to me. And I talked about that at the first of the message. This is a personal thing. This is not just a broad spectrum, Bible lesson. No, wait a minute. God did that for me. That's how important I am. This is where things are. This is the path that you must travel to find what you seek after. Will it always be easy? No. But the results will live eternally. Think about that for a minute. The thing, and I tell people all the time, we want to leave a legacy, right? Where our children, grandchildren, whatever the case, in some kind of way, grandpa was this or dad was this. And the fun old stories and stuff like that, that's great. We all want to do that. People have monuments made for them and statues and whatever, all those things. But what spiritual legacy are we leaving? That's even bigger. I think of people that you met maybe when you were little and you didn't realize it, and they were praying people or they were praying for you or this or that, and that resulted in your changed life. And then you talk to this person about Jesus and they talk to 10 more. Before long, you've made an impact that you didn't even know that you made. It happens all the time. What is that? What is happening? It's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be easy. But if we'll look beyond now and see eternity, we realize how important this is. The shadow of the cross would follow Jesus until the first nail was driven, and then the light overcame the dark. the hour had come. The question we ask is, how heavy was the weight of this? How heavy was the weight of this cross? We'll look at that deeper next week when we come back for part 2.